A small town night on Halloween, blanketed in quiet, with nothing but the hum of old streetlights and the whisper of a cold breeze filtering through the trees. My name's Luke. I'm a radio host for the local station, covering the late-night slot for all the town insomniacs and night shifters. It's a small place, the studio tucked into a 2-story building on Oak Street. Barely more than a few rooms and some old sound equipment that's on its last leg. This town isn't much either. A dot on the map, somewhere people pass through on their way to places they'd rather be. But tonight is different. It's Halloween, the night of our annual Midnight Hour special, where we open the phone lines and let people share their creepiest stories. Last year, a few pranksters called in with over-the-top ghost tales, but there were a few stories that left an impression on me, especially one from an old woman who swore her dead husband still wandered her halls. So here I am, settled into my worn-out office chair with a lukewarm coffee, prepared to spend the next couple of hours listening to whatever our town's folks have to share. I go through the usual routine, making small adjustments to the microphone and switching the lights to low, creating a cozy, almost haunting ambiance. The first caller is due any minute, and I'm eager, if a little wary. After all, I'm alone in this studio. Everyone else has gone home hours ago, and the old building has its quirks. The pipes knock, the floors creak, and once in a while I swear I can hear a faint voice in the static of the equipment. But I brush it off as part of the Halloween spirit, ready to dive into the night. I settle back, glancing at the old-fashioned clock ticking above the soundboard. Midnight is almost here. As soon as the minute hand reaches the top, the phone lines light up, and I can feel a subtle thrill. There's something about that anonymous connection. Someone out there in the dark, alone like me, but sharing the same quiet, unsettling energy through a simple phone line. Happy Halloween, I say, leaning into the mic. You're live on Midnight Hour, ready to share your story? The line crackles, followed by a low, hesitant chuckle. It's a man's voice, low and a little gravelly. Yeah, so I've got a story for you, he says finally, his voice a little steadier. It happened a long time ago, but I still think about it, you know? Like, I don't know if it's real or not, but it's one of those memories that doesn't really fade. I lean in closer, intrigued. I always enjoy a good opener, and this one has a nice edge to it. Go on, I encourage him. We're all ears. He clears his throat, the line quiet except for the faint sound of static. When I was a kid, I used to have these nightmares, really bad ones. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. My mom would always come in and sit with me until I calmed down. But one night was different. I woke up and I heard this voice coming from under my bed. It sounded just like my mom's voice, soft, gentle. She was saying, "Get up, honey, slowly. Don't turn on the light, just come over to me." The door opened. My real mom came in, looking at me all confused, asking me what I was doing. I'll never forget the way my heart stopped. I turned on the light, but there was nothing under the bed. I don't realize I'm holding my breath until he stops speaking. I exhale, feeling the faintest hint of a shiver on the back of my neck. That's definitely one to remember, I say, clearing my throat. I'd be sleeping with the lights on for a while after that. He laughs softly. Yeah, I think I did for a few days after. There's a brief pause before he adds, You know, sometimes I still hear her voice like it's right behind me calling me to go somewhere. Another chuckle, softer. Anyway, thanks for letting me share, man. Feels good to finally get it off my chest. I thank him and end the call, the silence rushing back to fill the room like a dark tide. Before I have a chance to fully let go of that last story, the phone rings again. I pick up, my voice steady, though there's a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach now. You're live on the Midnight Hour, I say, voice dropping just a bit lower to keep the atmosphere intact. Got a story for us? There's a brief pause on the other end, as if the caller is gathering their courage. Yeah, a soft female voice replies. I have a story. It's about a mirror. Go ahead, I encourage, leaning in. This happened a few years ago, when I was living in a small studio apartment. It wasn't much, just a single room with a tiny kitchen and an old bed in the corner. But there was this mirror, an antique one I'd found in a thrift shop. It was big, framed in dark wood. I'd hung it on the wall opposite my bed so every night I could see myself lying there. My gaze instinctively shifts to my own reflection in the glass between the sound booth and the hall. She continues. One night, I was lying in bed, kind of zoning out, just staring at the ceiling. I don't even remember why I looked at the mirror, but I did. And something was off. My reflection, it wasn't moving right. What do you mean? I ask, keeping my tone even. It's hard to explain. I wasn't moving, but my reflection was. It tilted its head just a little, like it was studying me. And its eyes, they looked wrong, darker, almost like they were looking into me, not at me. I thought I was imagining it, so I closed my eyes just for a second. But when I opened them, it was still watching me, its head tilted a little further towards me, like it was trying to come out of the mirror. A strange weight settles over me, pressing down, and I feel the urge to turn around to check my own reflection in the glass. What happened next? I ask, my voice barely audible. She takes a shaky breath. I moved out a week later. I haven't had a mirror in my bedroom since. I don't know what it was, but I feel like that wasn't just my reflection. I don't know how to explain it, but sometimes, in my dreams, I still see it watching me, its head tilted, eyes dark, like it's waiting for me to come back. For a moment, we're both silent, and I'm not sure which of us is holding on to that last thread of tension in the room. My voice is steadier than I feel when I finally respond. I can't even imagine. I think I'd be avoiding mirrors too after something like that. She laughs softly, a hollow, distant sound. Thanks. It feels good to talk about it. Maybe now it'll stay out of my dreams. We end the call, and I'm left in the thick, settling silence. A subtle tension presses against the edges of my mind. I shake myself, trying to dismiss it. Halloween stories, nothing more. And then, as I reach for my coffee, the phone rings again. Another caller, another story. I answer. Good evening, you're on the midnight hour, I say, trying to sound steady. This time the voice is different, older, gravelly. There's no hesitation, no nervous chuckle, just a calm, unsettling confidence. Yeah. I've got a story about someone you might have seen before. A man with a smile. Ever heard of him? A man with a smile? I ask, leaning into the microphone. I can't say I have. Go ahead, tell us your story. He chuckles, and it's not a warm sound. This was a few years back, around this time of year actually. I was walking home late, coming back from a friend's place. The streets were empty, the kind of empty where you start to feel like you're the last person left. I nod along, my mind drifting to the streets outside the station, silent and dimly lit by old, flickering street lamps. Anyway, I'd been walking for a while when I noticed him, standing at the far end of the block, under the street light. He was tall, kind of thin, and even from a distance I could tell. He was smiling, not just any smile, but one of those stretched, wide-open grins that doesn't look right on a person. I glance at the dark window across the studio, catching my own faint reflection. It's silly, but for a moment, I half expect to see someone else there, grinning back. I shake off the thought and lean in closer. Did he say anything? The man chuckles again, a dry, humorless sound. No, he didn't need to. I figured I'd just cross the street, keep my head down, and walk past him, so I did. But when I looked back, he was closer, and he was still smiling. No matter how fast I walked, he was there. He says finally, his voice low, almost a whisper now. Every time I looked, he'd moved closer, but I never saw him take a step. Just there, his grin getting wider like he knew I'd never outrun him. So, what happened? I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. I ran like I'd never run before. I could feel him behind me, close enough that I swore I'd turn around and see his eyes right in mine. But when I reached my front door and looked back, he was gone, just like that. But sometimes when I'm walking alone at night, I still feel him there, just waiting. And I know that one day, I'll see that smile again. I thank him, ending the call and letting the silence flood back in. I clear my throat, trying to shake off the feeling. Just stories, nothing more. I glance at the clock. I realize there's still an hour left in the broadcast. The phone rings, breaking the silence. With a shaky breath, I reach for the receiver, forcing my voice to sound calm. You're live on the midnight hour, I say, trying to ignore the faint tremor in my voice. A woman's voice comes through, gentle but with a strange hint of melancholy. Hello, I've got a story. It's about a family portrait. Something in me stealing for the next eerie tale. We're listening. When I was little, my grandparents had this old family portrait hanging in their living room. It was huge, framed in this heavy dark wood. I hated it. The faces in that painting, they looked wrong somehow. Even though they were supposed to be my family, there was something in their eyes that scared me. I listen in silence, feeling the weight of her story slowly pressing down, filling the room. The eyes, they seemed to follow me wherever I went. I'd be playing in the living room, and I'd feel them watching. My grandparents would laugh it off, tell me I was imagining things. But every time I stayed over, it was the same. One Halloween, I was sleeping over at their house. It was late, and the house was silent. I remember feeling this cold, like the room was filling up with it. I tried to ignore it, kept my eyes shut tight, but I couldn't help it. I opened my eyes, and there they were. The figures in the painting, they were moving. Their heads, all of them, turning to look at me. Their faces were still, but the eyes were alive, watching me like they were waiting for me to do something. What did you do? I ask, my voice barely audible. I screamed. I ran to my grandparents, told them what I saw. They just smiled, patted my shoulder and said, they like to keep an eye on family. I never went back after that. Sometimes I dream of that painting and it's always the same. They're watching me. I don't know why, but I feel like they're still waiting. A cold silence settles over us, and I don't know what to say. Finally, I thank her, ending the call and leaning back in my chair, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that settled over me. The studio is quiet again. I glance at the clock, realizing we're nearing the end of the broadcast. One more call maybe, and then I can leave. Just as I'm about to wrap up, the phone rings again, the sound cutting through the silence like a whisper. I hesitate, a strange reluctance settling over me, but I push it aside and pick up the receiver. You're live on the midnight hour, I say, forcing a steady tone. For a moment, there's only silence on the other end. A static crackles softly, filling the line, and I think the caller might have hung up. But then, a deep, almost breathy voice speaks. Do you know what night it is? I try to laugh it off, though there's a tightness in my chest. Halloween, of course. We've had some pretty spooky tales tonight. Got one to add? There's a pause, as though the caller is considering something. When he speaks again, his tone is softer. Oh, I've been listening, and I think there's one story you haven't heard yet. I lean forward. Go on, I say, voice barely a whisper. It's the story of a radio host, one who sits alone in a quiet studio, taking calls on Halloween night. But what he doesn't know is that the stories he hears aren't just stories, they're warnings. A cold dread fills me, creeping up my spine. I try to keep my voice steady, though my hands are shaking. Warnings of what? The caller chuckles softly, a hollow sound that feels disturbingly close, almost as though it's coming from right behind me. I resist the urge to look over my shoulder, my pulse quickening. His voice drops to a whisper, almost conspiratorial. Did you ever wonder why you started feeling watched? A shiver runs through me. I catch a glimpse of my own faint reflection in the glass across from me, and for the briefest moment, I swear I see something else there, someone lurking just beyond my own image, like a presence waiting patiently in the dark. He chuckles again, softer this time, and it sounds closer than before, like he's somehow slipped from the phone line into the room with me. Who is this? I stammer. The caller's voice drops lower, almost a whisper. Tonight, you are the story. Look around you. And then the line goes dead. I sit there frozen, the silence stretching out around me, thick and heavy. I feel like I'm caught in a strange dream. Everything too quiet, too still. I shake my head, trying to snap out of it. Just Halloween jitters, nothing more. But the strange caller shook me to the bones. I force myself to stand, telling myself it's time to go home, to leave this strange Halloween night behind. The studio feels different as I lock up. I pull on my jacket, glancing one last time at the quiet, empty space before I step out into the hall, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Outside, the night is thick, heavy with a stillness that doesn't feel quite right. I make my way down the steps, feeling the familiar crunch of leaves underfoot, their brittle snap oddly satisfying. The crisp autumn air feels refreshing, washing away the strange tension that clung to me back in the studio. I slip my hands into my pockets, breathing in the faint smell of wood smoke that drifts through the neighborhood, mingling with the earthy scent of fallen leaves. The town is peaceful tonight, a quiet, comforting silence that only small towns seem to have, like everything has settled down for the night. A soft glow from the occasional porch light guides me along the familiar path, casting a warm, welcoming light that makes the earlier unease seem silly. I pass a few houses, each one dark and still, their windows reflecting nothing but the soft gleam of streetlights. Somehow, it feels reassuring. This small town quiet, the streets empty and calm. With each step I feel lighter, as if I'm shedding the weight of the stories one by one, leaving them behind in the empty streets. By the time I reach my block, my mind has settled, my thoughts no longer circling back to the voices on the line or the unsettling final call. I remind myself it's all part of the job, a little Halloween fun, nothing more. Turning onto my street, I see the warm, familiar glow of my own porch light up ahead. The sight fills me with a sense of relief, and I let out a long breath, realizing just how tightly wound I'd been. As I reach the steps, I take one last look over my shoulder, as if expecting something lurking in the shadows. But all I see is the quiet, empty street behind me. I let myself in, closing the door softly and locking it behind me. The familiar creak of the floorboards and the gentle hum of the refrigerator are welcome sounds, a comforting backdrop to the peace of my home. I flick on the lamp in the living room, casting a warm glow that settles over the room. Kicking off my shoes, I sink onto the couch, taking a deep, satisfied breath. The night outside is dark and still, but here, everything feels safe. I let my eyes drift over the familiar room, cozy and inviting. And for the first time tonight, I feel completely at ease. Just a night of stories, I tell myself with a small smile. Nothing more than Halloween tales shared over the air. After a few moments, I decide to go into my bedroom, the familiar quiet of the house settling around me like a blanket. All I want is to sleep and let the night fade away. I change into my pajamas and I crawl into bed. The house is silent. Outside, the wind brushes softly against the windows, and I close my eyes, letting the day slip away as I begin to drift off. Then I hear a faint, almost indiscernible sound. It's soft, like a whisper just on the edge of hearing, and for a moment, I wonder if I'm dreaming. I hold my breath, listening, but the sound is so low it could be the hum of the house settling or the faint rush of blood in my ears. But as the seconds tick by, it grows louder, taking on the unmistakable shape of words. A murmur, something low and soft, almost gentle. I sit up, straining to listen, my skin prickling with an odd discomfort. The voice continues, slow and drawn out, as though it's calling for me. I can't make out the words, but the tone is almost inviting, coaxing. My pulse quickens, and I look around the darkened room, trying to locate the source of the sound. For a moment, I think it might be coming from the walls. But then, as I lean forward, my gaze sweeping the room, it hits me. The voice is coming from beneath the bed. I freeze, my heartbeat thudding in my chest, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. The voice, almost ghostly, continues its low murmur. Without thinking, I slowly swing one leg over the side of the bed, my mind a strange mix of curiosity and dread. I need to see, to make sure it's nothing, just my imagination. My foot hovers above the floor, and I steel myself, reaching for the light switch on the wall. But before I can make another move, something cold and unyielding latches onto my ankle. I gasp, jerking my leg back instinctively, but the grip tightens, cold fingers digging into my skin, holding me there. My heart slams in my chest as I look down, seeing a pale, thin hand wrapped around my ankle, its grip firm and unyielding. The skin is waxy, fingers elongated and bony, pressing hard enough that I can feel the bruising start. A surge of terror rushes through me, and I yank my leg free, scrambling backward off the bed. I stumble, almost tripping over myself as I dash out of the room, slamming the door behind me, breath coming in shallow, panicked bursts. In the light of the living room, I collapse onto the couch, heart racing as I pull up the leg of my pajama pants. I stare, horrified, at the faint marks encircling my ankle, small dark bruises beginning to form where those fingers had gripped me. I can still feel the cold pressure of that hand, a phantom weight lingering on my skin, and the fear settles into something deep, primal. I take a few slow breaths, trying to calm myself, to convince myself it wasn't real. But as I sit there, staring at the bruises darkening on my ankle, I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't a trick, that something had been there, waiting in the shadows beneath my bed. I try to calm myself, focusing on the steady rhythm of my breathing. But as the silence stretches on, my mind keeps drifting back to that voice, to the strange, cold touch, and I wonder if I really am alone. My gaze drifts toward the darkened hallway, back to my bedroom door. Steeling myself, I stand, each step back down the hall feeling heavier. I stop at the bedroom door, my hand hovering over the knob as I take a deep breath and push it open, half expecting to see something crouching in the darkness, but the room is silent, still. I edge forward, inching toward the bed, my pulse thundering in my ears. Bracing myself, I kneel down and, with a held breath, lower myself to the floor, peering under the bed frame. My heart is pounding so hard, I almost miss the silence. The space beneath is empty. No sign of anything. Just the shadows collecting there. Letting out a shaky breath, I sit back on my heels, laughing a little at myself. I must have dreamt it. The whole night has put me on edge, all those unsettling stories. It's no wonder I'd imagine something like that, I reason, trying to rationalize my own fear. Deciding I need fresh air, I put on some pants, grabbed my coat, and headed toward the door. As I slip my arm through the sleeve, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a glint in the hallway mirror. I turn, and for a second I freeze, staring at the glass. There, in the reflection, I see myself. But something's wrong. I take a step closer and so does the reflection. But as I reach the mirror, my hand hovering just over the glass, I see its eyes, darker than mine, sunken and almost hollow. Its mouth twitches, an eerie little twist of a grin that I'm not making. The face stares back, its expression twisting, contorting into something foreign, sinister. I stumble back, heart racing as I look away, half expecting the image to follow. But when I look back, it's just my reflection, expression ordinary. Still, I can't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, mimicking me, waiting for me to notice. I turn quickly, throwing on my coat and heading for the door. Every instinct is telling me to leave the house, to get out and away from the strange tension pooling in the dark corners of the rooms. The chill of the night air is immediate as I step outside, and for a moment, the silence is a comfort. The town is quiet, the streets empty, save for the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I shove my hands in my pockets, willing the cold air to clear my head, to brush away the unsettling images clinging to my mind. The quiet street stretches out before me, bathed in the eerie glow of streetlights. Their faint hum and the rustle of leaves are the only sounds breaking the silence as I walk, the cold air biting at my cheeks and hands. I keep my pace steady, letting the rhythm of my footsteps soothe me, convincing myself that I just need a little distance to shake off the strange heaviness from the night. That's when I notice something in the distance. A figure stands at the far end of the street, barely a silhouette beneath the faint, sputtering glow of the streetlight. At first, he's nothing more than a shape against the darkness, almost blending into the shadows, yet something about him snags my attention. A stillness that feels wrong. His posture is rigid, unnaturally poised, as though he's been planted there. My eyes struggle to adjust, and as they do, details come into focus. He's tall, unnervingly so, and though his face is mostly cloaked in shadow, I can just make out the faint glint of teeth. A smile, or something close to it, stretched too wide, curving up in a way that feels unsettlingly hungry. A prickling chill crawls along my spine, and I swallow, forcing a breath into my tightening chest. Just some late-night wanderer, I tell myself. Someone playing a Halloween prank, maybe. There's no shortage of thrill-seekers tonight. I push down the urge to turn back, forcing myself to walk on, focusing on the rhythm of my steps and the comforting crunch of leaves beneath my feet. But even as I move forward, I can't shake the weight of that gaze pressing into me, clinging like a cold fog. As I near the next streetlight, something compels me to glance back, a strange instinct I can't quite resist. He's closer now. I freeze, the breath catching in my throat. I hadn't heard a single step, not a sound, not the faintest shuffle on the pavement, and yet somehow he's drifted down the road, slipping through the dark as if the distance itself bent to bring him closer. A dark pulse of dread flares through me, a primal instinct whispering for me to run, to get as far from him as possible. But I'm rooted, unable to tear my gaze away from that face, those dark, gleaming eyes that seem to hold no light. His mouth curves wider, stretching into a grotesque imitation of a grin, a frozen mockery of human expression. With great effort, I force myself to break my stare, wrenching my gaze back to the sidewalk. I turn down a side street, quickening my pace, forcing each step as I tell myself it's just a trick, just a costume. I quicken my steps, resisting the overwhelming urge to look back. Every streetlight I pass feels like a checkpoint, each one holding back the darkness until I step beyond it, into the next stretch of shadow. Finally, my block appears ahead, my house looming at the end like a distant lighthouse. I climb the steps, fingers shaking as I reach for my keys and turn back once more, my gaze sweeping the empty street, searching for that figure. Nothing. The street is still, dark and silent, stretching out behind me like an empty stage, as if whatever I saw has folded back into the night, waiting in the shadows. I step inside, shutting the door firmly behind me, locking it with more force than usual. My heart is still racing, and I force myself to take a few deep breaths, leaning against the door. The night feels thick with an odd tension, a weight that seems to settle over everything. Walking to the bathroom, I splash cold water on my face, trying to shake off the paranoia. As I lift my head and glance in the mirror, I can see how tired I am. The strange events of the night really took a toll on me. As I turn toward the darkened hallway, a shape catches my eye. A faint, tall figure standing at the edge of the shadows. Barely more than an outline, a vague impression of something with blurred features. My breath catches and I blink, my pulse thudding in my ears. When I look again, it's gone, but the lingering feeling that something has crept into my home, something wrong, remains. I can't stay here, not alone, not with the growing sense that whatever unsettling presence has woven itself into the walls isn't finished with me yet. A sudden urgency grips me, and I grab my keys, my heart pounding as I decide to head back to the station. The place that earlier felt suffocating now seems like a refuge. Slipping on my coat, I step outside, carefully closing the door behind me. The cool night air brushes against my face, and for a brief moment, I feel the tightness in my chest ease. There's a sense of release, an illusion of safety, as though the distance from my home might finally calm whatever strange, creeping presence seems to have slipped into my life tonight. I start down the sidewalk, every step lighter, my pace quickening toward the faint glow of the station in the distance, where the hum of equipment might make the night feel normal again. But as I walk, something shifts, subtle and unnerving. The silence feels too complete, the houses around me too dark, as though the entire neighborhood has slipped into some strange, unnatural slumber. Even the soft rustle of leaves has vanished. I quicken my pace, pulling my coat tighter as the night air sinks into my bones. But the momentary comfort I felt is gone, replaced by a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a distinct feeling that I'm being watched. It's more than a sense. It feels like a presence, hovering just behind me, following each step, even though I can't hear sound. Against my better instincts, I glance over my shoulder, expecting something. But there's nothing. Only the empty street, stretching out in eerie quiet. I tell myself to keep moving, to ignore the creeping unease gathering around me. But as I pass the first house, I glance up at a second-story window, where I catch a glimpse of a figure standing behind the glass, motionless, staring out into the night. Its silhouette is vague, undefined, but I feel the weight of its gaze, fixed, unwavering, as if waiting for me to notice. My heart pounds and I look away, quickening my pace, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. As I approach the next house, there's another figure in the window, perfectly still, face hidden by shadow, but unmistakably staring down at me. The same fixed, empty gaze. My pulse quickens, a cold fear twisting in my stomach. House after house, the pattern repeats, each one holding a silent figure, watching, tracking my every movement. I lower my head, forcing my eyes to stay on the pavement, resisting the urge to look back at those windows where I can feel their stares following me. The familiar houses now look twisted, sinister, and beneath it all, that oppressive silence wraps tighter. Finally, I see the faint red glow of the radio station sign, a distant beacon in the darkness, promising relief. I break into a brisk walk, half running, desperate to escape the eyes clinging to my every step. As I reach the station door, I force myself to stop, turning to steal one last glance down the street. The road lies empty, the houses dark, no figures at the windows now, no stares drilling into me. Trembling slightly, I turn the knob and step inside, shutting the door firmly behind me. Inside, the station feels untouched. My own footsteps echo softly as I move through the dim space. The control room's low hum a faint comfort, grounding me in the familiarity of the equipment. I settle into my chair, slipping on my headset, feeling the steady weight of it settle over my ears, filling them with the faint buzz of static. I close my eyes, trying to calm my mind, but the final caller's words replay over and over, their quiet menace filling every corner of my thoughts. "Tonight, you are the story," the voice had said. My heart races, and I feel a creeping sense that each moment brings me closer to something inevitable, something waiting just beyond my understanding. I glance up at the glass window separating the control room from the hallway. The station should be empty, I'm certain of it, but something moves in the glass, just on the edge of my vision. The face in the reflection is twisted, its eyes too wide, mouth stretched into an unnaturally grim smile, just like the smiling man. The skin is pale, almost sickly, and the eyes stare back at me with a dark intensity, as if this reflection has been waiting, anticipating my return. My breath catches in my throat and a wave of cold fear sweeps over me as I realize this isn't just a mirror image. It's something else, an entity. Then I hear it. a whisper so soft it barely registers, but it's unmistakably the voice from the call. I told you tonight, you are the story. My stomach drops as the room's shadows begin to lengthen, dark shapes shifting along the walls, as if the specters of each story are here, coming to life around me. They gather, their forms coalescing into familiar shapes, each one like a memory turned real. I stagger backward, knocking over a chair, desperate to put space between me and these figures that seem to close in, an encroaching tide of shadows. Desperation claws at me, and my mind races, grasping for a way to stop this. They're getting closer, their presence thick in the air, pressing down on me, suffocating. I can't think. I can barely breathe. All I know is I need to end this somehow, to sever whatever connection has bound me to them. Frantically, I turn toward the main equipment board, the heartbeat of the station, the source of the broadcast that started this nightmare. My hands shake as I reach for the control panel, feeling the cool metal beneath my fingers, and in a surge of adrenaline, I pull at the knobs, yanking cables from their sockets. Sparks flicker as the power board sputters, and I rip wires free, the harsh screech of metal and plastic filling the air as I tear into the equipment. The figures falter, their forms flickering like shadows in dying light. The smiling man's grin fades, and I feel their grip on me weaken as I destroy the board, ripping it apart, feeling something almost alive fight against me as I do. Finally, with one last pull, the lights in the station dim, then go dark, plunging the room into an oppressive silence. I stay there, crouched in the darkness, my breathing loud in the stillness. Slowly the air clears, and the lingering sense of dread begins to lift. I glance around, half expecting one of the figures to remain, but there's nothing. No smiling man, no shadows in the glass. I drag myself out of the studio, each step heavy, unsteady, as though I'm pushing through the lingering shadows of the night. My mind spins with fragments of what happened, but as I step into the dawn, a calm begins to settle over me. The first faint light spreads over the horizon, softening the edges of the town. The horrors of the night feel distant now, dissolving into the ether with each step. The streets are empty, still veiled in the final whispers of night, but under the soft gray light, they look ordinary, familiar, even comforting. I breathe in the cool morning air, feeling the weight of the night lifting, fading like the end of a strange dream. As I walk, I remind myself that it's over, that whatever lurked in the shadows of the station is gone, left behind in the stillness of those empty halls. But as I reach my door, I catch sight of my ankle. The markings are still there, dark, faint bruises wrapped around the skin like ghostly fingerprints. A reminder that whatever happened wasn't just a dream. The next day, I don't go back to the station. Instead, I send a message to my employer, apologizing and offering to pay for the damages. But I know deep down, I'll never set foot in that studio again. The stories, the voices, the shadows, they all belong to that place now, relics of a Halloween I know I'll never forget. 1 year later, Halloween night returns, bringing with it a sense of quiet dread that lingers just beneath the surface. Despite every attempt to forget, an urge stirs in me as the clock ticks closer to midnight. It pulls at me, insistent, as if something in my bones remembers. With a shaky hand, I pick up the phone and dial my former radio station. The line rings, crackling faintly, and a young voice answers, bright, eager, the way I used to sound. "Happy Halloween! You're live on Midnight Hour," they say, laughter in their tone. "Got a story for us?" For a moment, I don't speak, my pulse pounding as memories from that night flood back. Whispers, shadows, the marks still faint on my ankle. Then, my voice, low and steady, finds the words, as if they're being drawn from somewhere deeper than memory. "Do you know what night it is?" I ask, the words thick with warning. There's a pause on the other end, just long enough for them to catch the chill in my tone. They laugh again, but there's hesitation, a slight wavering. "Halloween, of course. So, got a story for us?" I take a breath, each word slow and deliberate. "I do. It's about a radio host who thought he was just listening to stories one Halloween night until he realized he'd become part of one. I pause, letting the weight of my words sink in. Be careful. You are the story tonight.